choosing him?
No, I choose my home.
Season 2 of Netflix's Devil May Cry is here, and I wanted to do my own review and give my own thoughts on the season as a Devil May Cry fan, just like I did with the first season of Netflix's Devil May Cry. But this time around, for my Season 2 review, I want to be a little bit more fair when it comes down to it. I don't want to seem too biased, leaning towards overly praise like I did originally, or overly critical like other people. Especially when looking at the reaction for this season on Twitter from most fans, which has been incredibly negative, which I do understand, because the first season did have problems, and a lot of people do have problems with the series creator, and he does have his own history. But using that as a justification to go after not only other fans that do like the series or the creator himself, wishing death threats, among other things, is not okay. Not only is it incredibly toxic, but that behavior invalidates your entire argument, and it makes the entirety of the community look bad as a whole, and us less likely to get anything for Devil May Cry in the future. And it also alienates people from actually entering into the fandom. As a community, we need to be better, not attacking one another for liking or not liking a series. We should civilly agree to disagree and have discussions on these things. Not complete debates, but civil discussions. Because we all have a passion and love for this series. While this adaptation is not perfect, and it does have plenty of flaws, is an overall adaptation, just like the DC and Marvel movies are. That's what makes adaptations so interesting. We've had several different versions of Batman, but none of them are actually one-to-one from the comics completely. They all bring something unique to the table to make them their own interesting adaptation of said character. That's why none of them are completely one-to-one with the source material, and they all have their own unique little quirks that make them different but still recognizable as the said character that you know and love. And when it comes down to it, while I didn't really cover a lot of the marketing for Season 2, I still was slightly excited, and obviously, I do think Season 2 is a notable step up in a couple areas compared to Season 1. While it obviously still has problems when it comes to the overall characters, some of their arcs, and a lot of their designs, and a couple other things, it does also have some of its own unique ideas that it does try to bring to the table to make it its own unique adaptation, from some things that were cut from the overall series to referencing other things from the games, but I do think it still struggles with some of the problems that came from the first season with its handling of certain characters, the overall inclusion of some elements of politics when it comes to the Bush administration, and a couple other things, which I will admit on a rewatch, it does hold back the first season in a lot of areas. But in the second season, I will admit that some of those elements are toned down. While they are still there, they're kind of outright toning them down or just getting rid of them by the time of Season 3. Because in this season, they do kill off the certain characters that are a gateway into those plot lines. Which, obvious slight spoilers, they do kill off the president and also Baines as well. And because Kevin Conroy did pass away, they did kind of recast the character and had someone try to mimic the overall voice that Kevin did. But to be honest, it's slightly jarring, and honestly, they waited till the end of the season to finally kill off that particular character. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really like that decision. I think he should have been killed off sooner, but that's personally my own opinion on it. Also, when it comes to the overall main villain of this season, when it comes to Arius, I do think he's a notable improvement on the villain of the first season with the White Rabbit. I felt like the White Rabbit was good, but not great. I felt like he was a villain that could have been utilized and written a lot better than he was. He was more of a foil to Mary, and with the villain of this season being more of a foil to Virgil in a sense with the character of Arius, I feel like that's one area where this series does repeat the same mistake. It slightly pulls from something like Pirates of the Caribbean, where the movie villains are not completely the overall main villain for our central character. For instance, while Davy Jones is the main villain for for Jack in the second film, he's more of an actual villain to Will when you really think about it because of how their arcs will parallel and mirror, where Will share an identical fate to Davy Jones, and the overall villain for the third film is more of a mirror and a foil to Elizabeth Swann. This overall adaptation of Devil May Cry is doing something slightly similar when it comes to the villains, unlike with the games, where each of the mainline games, the villains are mirroring Dante in a lot of sense, and they are meant to go against him with the overall themes. And they do obviously do that in the show, but unlike with the games where they do have a personal connection to Dante in some facets, this show kind of gives them more of a personal connection to some of the side characters. While Dante does go against these villains, he doesn't really have a tried and true connection to them. They have a tried and true connection to one of the side characters. For the first season, the White Rabbit had a connection to Lady. For this season, Arias has a connection to Virgil. And it's something that I'm kind of 50-50 on. I do like the idea of these villains mirroring the side characters, but they also take away from mirroring the main character of the show, and that's where this series does kind of not really handle things the best, because Dante really isn't the focal point of the show. And that's a major criticism that I have, not only with the first season, but with this season, because Dante doesn't have much of an arc. He doesn't have much of a thing to push him forward, where most of the games did slightly push him forward and gave him a bit of an arc. And the issue I have with this series is that they push other side characters forward with giving them an arc to some extent, but not Dante. And that to me is the biggest problem. And the biggest thing that I was hoping for in this season is that after the last one where Dante was betrayed and screwed over constantly, when he does come out of cryostasis, that he would be a little bit more callous and untrusting and kind of just try to do his own thing. And Lady would have to work to regain his trust a little bit. But no, they don't completely do that. While they do acknowledge it and they do try to do something like that, it's only for like the second episode, and then they rush into this half-baked romance between Lady and Dante, which I know there are the shippers out there, and this ship has gone on for a long time, and that's great, and I don't have a problem with the ship itself. My problem is that it doesn't actually feel earned, and it's very much rushed in this show compared to the games. Like, in the second episode, they do acknowledge this whole thing, but it's played off like a joke from Dante's point of view. Like, I get it. If people want to use the justification, well, in Devil May Cry 3, his interactions with Lady were a little bit jokey and stuff like that, but they were always based in the idea of callousness and both having to learn about the other. And they both have to gain each other's trust throughout the entirety of the game. Even if Dante makes a joke about Lady shooting him in the head, obviously he is a bit pissed off. Instead of hurting her or killing her, he just walks off. He's a bit sarcastic and callous throughout this whole interaction. And this is right after Lady has a brief reunion with her father, which is why she's so pissed off in this scene. So you would think in the second season, after all the actions that Lady did to Dante in the first season, and betraying him one final time to lock him up in cryostasis, that she would have to gradually regain his trust throughout the entirety of the season. Right? Wrong! Not only do they acknowledge the overall betrayal of Lady over and over again, they fast-track this whole forgiveness between her and Dante to the point where they make Dante kind of look like a complete idiot because he doesn't actually care that Lady did all this. And how she proves that she can be trusted this time around is fast-tracked just as bad, where she just gives him back his locket and she gives him his sword back that she hid away. Like, that's going to actually make it any better. Then they overall rush and push this romance between the two where they're not only kissing, but apparently they did the deed. Which, again, why? I wouldn't have much of a problem with it if it felt earned and maybe it was closer towards the middle of the season. Because if there was more than actually 8 episodes, I feel like maybe this could have worked. But not only does it feel rushed, but it also feels kind of out of place with how she was with Dante in the first season. While there was a couple blushes here and there, let's be honest, there was no actual point that built their romance between the two. And that's another reason why I don't feel feel this works. And to top it off, to play this whole thing like a joke and Dante just immediately forgives her just doesn't really work for me. It just feels stupid. It doesn't give Lady any consequences to her actions in the first season with him. And the only reason Dante is even brought out of cryostasis is because his brother's in this season and they have to fight. I'll be honest, Dante is not really in this season that much. I do feel he is written a little bit better and his jokes when he does fight are less pop culture based, so that is a plus. But again, just like in the first season, he's really underdeveloped and he's kind of just a static character that a lot of the time is just getting his ass kicked. It'd be one thing if this was a one-time occurrence, but this is throughout the first season and in this season. He gets beaten and stabbed by Virgil multiple times. He hardly really beats Arius. Mundus is the one that does that. And the only times he really wins a couple fights is with the henchmen of Arius, where he does fight them. And they do try to develop this relationship between him and his brother and challenge it just like in the games. And in some areas, I do see where it does work. And in other areas, it does fall a little bit flat. Where they do try to showcase Dante and Virgil's relationship when they were younger and that brotherly rivalry that they did have and the different relationship with their mother Ava. And it was a little bit odd to see Virgil and Dante actually going to school and other various stuff because it wasn't really something that was even hinted at in the games. It was kind of just thought of that they were homeschooled to some extent. And to be honest, some elements of Virgil's character in this show I do like, while other elements I really don't. The idea that Mundus actually kidnapped Virgil and raised him and stuff like that, which was a scrapped bit of Devil May Cry lore that was cut from the games. And to be honest, this inclusion to the series, which was its own standalone add-on, is fairly interesting because it does showcase how Virgil learns how to fight and a plethora of other things, while also pulling from scrapped story ideas from the reboot of Devil May Cry with Dante. And this inclusion has fans a little bit mixed, and I actually think this could have worked better if it was written better, because this is something that pulls a little bit from the idea of Joker and Jason Todd from Arkham Knight, or that one scene of Jokerized Tim from Batman the Animated Series. This type of idea that the villain raises the son of his sworn enemy to turn them against their own flesh and blood is something that we've seen before, and it's a trope that can work if written properly, and it's something that Mundus has kind of done in the games with how he used Trish, but also how he manipulated and used Virgil, but with that, it was done by force. This, on the other hand, is done through gradual manipulation, which does showcase the cunning nature of Mundus, still turning Virgil into his servant, but this time through actual manipulation and cunning trickery that turns him against not only his brother, but his actual father's ideals. With how Sparta is treated in the show, feeling a bit inconsistent, I do think this concept does work on paper, and if given proper time to develop certain things, this actual idea is an interesting concept. My problem is how Virgil is written in the show in some aspects. While I do agree that him shit-talking Ava is a little out of character, let's not pretend that he doesn't have mommy issues and he didn't have his own grievances with his mother. He's just a lot more upfront and honest about it in this show, and I do understand that this does kind of work in some aspects, but it is still a little out of character compared to how he was written in the games. Also, another fan complaint that I did see, and I do understand, but I want to actually rationalize with you guys, is Mundus giving Yamato to Virgil. A lot of people say that this destroys the character and it makes no sense and blah blah blah, but let me actually rationalize Mundus even having Yamato in the first place, and that is because he had these demons start the fire in the mansion, and maybe one of them actually took one of the leftover swords and gave it to Mundus because obviously rebellion is still in Dante's possession, so they didn't take that sword. So Mundus only had one for one brother that he had in his possession, which did actually make a lot of sense, because it's not exactly Mundus giving Yamato to Virgil in a sense, it's him giving something he already stole. And the idea of Mundus becoming like a father figure to Virgil and him manipulating him and stuff like that, I do actually think this concept does work, and it could have been written better if given actual time to develop it a little bit more, because this only 8 episodes thing is really dulling down the series. episodes. It forces the episodes to really rush through certain things, and it kind of dulls down elements. And with them renewing the series for a season 3, I'm really hoping that they take the time to actually improve on some of the criticisms that they had from this season, because there are a lot of issues with it, just like with the first season. While a lot of the character designs are a bit iffy, I do think some of them do work in animation, and I can't really say I don't like them. Outside of the devil triggers for both of the brothers, they suck. While I have been very critical, negative, and very much critiquing a lot of elements from season 2, I want to get into the more positive things that I did like about this season, and that is the main villain. While I have been positive in some aspects of things that I did like, where some things could have been written a little bit better, I will say the main villain of this series, compared to the White Rabbit of the first season, Aureus is actually outstanding. Them using elements from Devil May Cry 2 of all the games in the series that fans love, they actually choose one of the worst games that they actually hate and turn it around a little bit and actually make him work. And I did actually appreciate that a lot. While they did cut important characters from this plot line of Devil May Cry 2 that they're borrowing from, like Lucia, even though she was referenced in season 1 with a brief cameo, why they cut her, I don't know. But the overt idea of Aureus with his clone army and stuff like that, which is borrowing a little bit from the mannequins and the overall idea of Lucia's character with her demon sisters from Devil May Cry 2, is actually pretty interesting. And I do think the reason why they cut Lucia and replaced her with Lady is to actually move the plot forward. And I kind of understand that, but it still is a bit jarring. But I will admit, some elements of how they utilize the Devil May Cry 2 plot are actually pretty interesting, and how Aureus is portrayed is amazing. Being a mixture of a dark version of the Avatar, where he can reincarnate into a different body, and a little bit of Ra's al Ghul influence from DC. Going into this season, I had a bad feeling that they were just going to make him this generic businessman type, but they did kind of lean into his history from Devil May Cry 2 and actually expand on it, and I thought that was a very tasteful, interesting idea compared to the White Rabbit. But I do think his backstory needed a little bit more layers other than just a drunken, abusive father. I think overall, they actually made Aureus a very threatening villain. Not only is he incredibly manipulative, and he can obviously outthink certain people, using their weaknesses against them, kind of like Eric Voss from the Indiana Jones The Great Circle game, where he's incredibly intelligent, but also he's a very good physical threat as well, which is more than can be said about the version we have in the games, where not only does he give Virgil a run for his money at one point, but also Dante as well. And I thought that was incredibly interesting, and he's a lot more complex and suave than the villain that we got in the first season. While I certainly did love a lot of elements of how they handled Aureus in this season, a lot of other elements when it comes to Argo Sax are not the greatest. Certain elements from the lore aspect, pulling from mangas and other stuff when it comes to this character and his relationship with Mundus, is, I guess, 50-50 for me. The overall design is where it loses me in a lot of ways, because I do think the monster version does pull a little bit from the monstrous, like, blob that we had to fight as Dante in Devil May Cry 2 was an interesting idea, but it just doesn't work in a lot of ways. It just sucks. While the version of Argo Sax we got in the games wasn't perfect, it was a relatively simple but also really cool design. And to be honest, the design we got in the show just loses a lot of the cool factor we had with that design. While a lot of the elements they do try to include with the design do work on paper, but in actual execution, not so much. And I will say, when it comes to the overall season's plot, I do feel it is a bit jumbled, but it is a little bit more improved on when it comes to its pacing compared to the first season in some ways. While it still suffers through some of the same problems, it does slightly improve on a lot here and there. The overall villain of this season is actually remarkably better. Some of the characters do suffer through some of the same problems that they did in last season, but some of them are actually handled a little bit better, and some of the flaws from the first season are not as prevalent in this season. While the action is a little bit better and there's less use of 3D animation, the music of this season is a mixed bag. I know it's going for the 2000s style, and I'm a 2003 baby, so I do get that, but a lot of the music choices just do not work, and some of them are cut up pretty bad. that, which is a major flaw when it comes to this season. It's missing some of that great nature of the Devil May Cry series of music because it's not all just rock. There is that gothic nature to the music as well. And that's just not here at all, which is a major flaw that I do have because it can communicate how characters are feeling without lyrics, which is why the iconic Tim Burton Batman theme by Danny Elfman is so iconic. It doesn't even have to have any lyrics, just like with the Star Wars themes or the themes for the Harry Potter movies and so on. This series is kind of missing that with them leaning towards that 2000s type of style. While it improves on a lot when it comes to the music, at the same time, just like with the other things, it's still a messy improvement and it could be a lot better than what it is. But these are just some of my overall thoughts. It's not really put together. I didn't have much of a script for this video, and I wanted to get out a review for this series because I love Devil May Cry, and this series is just very divisive in a lot of ways for a lot of fans. There's a lot of good elements that could be developed if given proper writing and proper execution, but they just aren't, and I feel like this series could be a lot better if they had that time. Because overall, this series does improve on a lot from the last season, but it's a very messy improvement, and I feel like it could be a lot better by the time of season 3 or a lot worse. But let me know your guys' and gals' thoughts in the comments down below, whether you agree, disagree, and make sure to like this review if you did enjoy, or give it a dislike if you didn't. It's perfectly fine. If you are new to this channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notifications button to be notified whether I upload, and check out some of the other videos you can see on screen with other related content, and have a good rest of your guys' and gals' night, morning, afternoon, or whatever it is for you in the world. Peace out. Bye-bye.